Why did me and my boyfriend break up after reading an article on ChatGPT? When I was 7, I realized I could see sounds. Not metaphorically, I literally saw them. My mom's voice was warm amber honey dripping through the air. Thunder was deep purple explosions. I thought everyone saw the world this way until my teacher sent me to the counselor for drawing the colors of math class. Turns out I have chromesthesia, a condition where sounds trigger colors in your vision. Only 1 in 3,000 people have it. By college, I'd given up on dating. Every time I mentioned that someone's laugh looked like golden fireworks, they'd give me that look, the one that screamed, "You're insane." So I stopped mentioning it. I stopped mentioning a lot of things. Then last year, my roommate dragged me to a silent disco. You know those parties where everyone wears wireless headphones? I went alone to the dance floor, just wanting to lose myself in the colors only I could see. That's when I noticed him, this guy standing completely still in the middle of all the dancing, tears streaming down his face. We bumped into each other reaching for water, and our headphones fell off. "Sorry," he said, wiping his eyes. "That song was it was like silver waterfalls." My heart stopped. "You see it too?" The way his eyes widened told me everything. "You can see the colors?" We spent the rest of the night comparing what we saw. His voice was emerald green to me, like forest light. Mine was rose gold to him, he said, like sunrise. We both saw rain as powder blue droplets. Thunder was always deep purple. For the first time in my life, someone understood why I cried during certain songs, why I had to leave restaurants when the background music clashed with the conversation colors. Dating him was like finally being fluent in a language I'd only whispered to myself. We'd go to concerts just to watch the light shows only we could see. 6 months in, I knew I loved him. I loved how he'd hum specific notes just to paint colors in my vision when I was sad. I loved how we could sit in complete silence and still be sharing an entire conversation through the colors from the background noise around us. So one random Tuesday night, we were scrolling through ChatGPT together, asking it ridiculous questions about our condition. That's when we found it, this article about chromesthesia having genetic markers traced back to an ancient tribe in northern Finland, the Sami people. The article said it was incredibly rare, like only a handful of bloodlines worldwide still carried the gene. "No way we're both from some ancient Finnish tribe," I laughed, but he was already pulling up more articles. "That would explain why we match so perfectly, though," he said, and something about the way he said it made my chest warm. Like, what are the odds of 2 random people seeing the exact same purple for thunder? We joked about it for weeks. Every time we saw the same color for something new, we'd say it was our ancient Finnish connection. It became our inside joke. So when those DNA test ads started popping up, let's see if we're really descendants of the color-seeing tribe. We ordered 2 kits, made a whole date night of spitting in tubes and sealing envelopes. We were so excited, like kids waiting for their birthdays. "When we get the results, we should compare our ancestry percentages," I said. "Bet we both have some Finnish." 3 weeks later, his results came first. I was at work when he texted me, all caps. 23% Finnish, 31% Norwegian. We were right. I couldn't stop smiling. My coworkers probably thought I was insane, grinning at my phone like that. "Mine haven't come yet," I texted back, "but that's amazing." 2 days later, I got the email that my results were ready. I was about to open them when my phone rang. It was him, and he was crying. Not the happy tears from when we first met. These were different. "Just come over," he said, his voice shaking. "Please." I drove over with this sick feeling in my stomach, the kind where you know something's about to change everything. He had his laptop open when I arrived, and his face was pale. "My mom called," he said quietly. "I told her about the Finnish thing, and she got weird. Really weird." He turned the laptop toward me. There it was, on my results page under DNA relatives. His name. His picture. First cousin, 12, 5% DNA shared. The colors in the room seemed to dim. That's not possible." "Your dad is my mom's brother," he whispered. "They haven't spoken in 20 years. Some fight about their parents' inheritance. That's why we never knew. Different last names, different cities." I sit frozen on his couch staring at that screen showing our names next to each other with those numbers underneath. First cousin, 12, 5% DNA shared. My brain knows what the words mean, but it refuses to make them connect to us, to what we've been doing for 6 months. He's crying next to me, and I can hear these awful choking sounds coming from him, but I can't turn my head to look because if I see his face right now, this becomes something I can't take back. I need just a few more seconds where this isn't real yet. His voice cuts through the silence, and he says his mom told him because of some fight when their parents died and left them money and property. That's why we never knew. Different last names because his mom got married. Different cities because they stopped speaking decades ago. The colors in the room look wrong now, like my chromesthesia is glitching out. The hum of his laptop sounds muddy brown instead of the soft blue it should be, and the traffic noise from outside looks like sick yellow instead of pale orange. Everything is distorted and broken just like us. I stand up without saying anything because words feel impossible right now, and I grab my keys off his coffee table. He says my name, but I'm already walking to the door and I can't stop moving because if I stop, I'll collapse. I drive back to my dorm and I don't turn on any music because even silence has colors right now, and I can't handle seeing anything. The drive takes 15 minutes, but it feels like hours, and I keep seeing that DNA results page every time I blink. When I walk into my dorm room, Melinda is sitting on her bed doing homework, and she takes one look at my face and immediately closes her laptop. She asks what happened, and her voice sounds concerned and scared. I sit down on my bed and she comes over and sits next to me, and then I tell her everything. I say the words out loud for the first time. We're cousins. First cousins. We share grandparents. His mom is my dad's sister. Saying it makes it real in a way that just thinking it didn't, and hearing my own voice say we're cousins makes denial completely impossible. Melinda doesn't know what to say, and honestly neither do I, because she just sits there next to me, and when I start crying she holds my hand and doesn't try to make it better because there's no making this better. I don't sleep that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see that DNA results page with our pictures next to each other and those numbers. 12. 5% shared DNA. First cousin. My brain keeps trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out how the person I love can also be my cousin, how everything we've done together is now something different and wrong. At 3 a.m., I finally give up on sleeping and I grab my phone and start searching. I type Genetic Counseling Center campus into Google and find the University Health Center website. They have emergency appointments available, and I fill out the online form requesting the earliest slot they have because I need someone to explain what this actually means. The genetic counselor fits me in the next afternoon as an emergency case, and when I walk into her office, she's professional and kind-looking. She explains that first cousins share grandparents, and that we each got 25% of our DNA from those grandparents, so we share about 5% with each other. She talks about biological risks and says the things people worry about mainly apply to having children together, genetic disorders, and birth defects. She's being so professional and clinical about it, but I can see concern in her eyes when I tell her we've been dating for 6 months. She asks if we plan to continue the relationship, and I realize I haven't let myself think about that question yet. I tell her I don't know, and she nods like that's a reasonable answer, which somehow makes me feel worse. Before I leave, she hands me a paper with referrals for therapists who work with complex family situations and trauma. He texts me constantly over the next 2 days, but I can't make myself respond because I don't know what to say. Every time my phone buzzes with a notification, my stomach hurts, and I feel sick. On the 3rd day, she gives me this apologetic look and then leaves us alone. We sit in the common room because I can't be alone with him in my bedroom anymore, and that realization makes everything hurt worse. He looks as destroyed as I feel, with dark circles under his eyes and his hair messy like he hasn't showered. He says we need to talk about what happens next, and I finally admit out loud that I don't think we can keep doing this even though I still love him. He argues that the love is what matters, that we didn't know, so it's not like we did anything wrong, but even as he's saying it, I can see he doesn't really believe it either. The way his voice sounds desperate and broken looks like emerald green glass shattering, and I realize my chromesthesia is turning everything about him into something painful now, instead of beautiful. I tell him I need some space to think and process everything. He nods slowly and stands up from the couch. As he's walking toward the door, he turns back and leans in to kiss me goodbye. Just automatic habit from 6 months of dating. I flinch away before I can stop myself. My whole body just reacts and pulls back from him. The look on his face when I do that absolutely destroys me because I can see exactly how much it hurts him. But I also know in that moment that the flinch changed something big between us, something we can't take back. He leaves without saying anything else, and I sit there alone in the common room feeling like I just broke something that was already shattered. The next morning, I pull up the referral list the genetic counselor gave me, and I find Cormac Reynolds near the top. His office has an online booking system, and I grab the first available appointment, which is in 3 days. Those 3 days drag by in this weird fog where I go through the motions of existing, but nothing feels real. When I finally walk into Cormac's office, he's this older guy with kind eyes, and he gestures for me to sit down. I start trying to explain what happened, about the DNA test and the results, and my boyfriend being my cousin. But I only get about 2 sentences in before I completely fall apart and start crying so hard I can't talk. Cormac just sits there quietly and lets me cry. He hands me tissues and doesn't try to rush me or make it better. After a while, when I can breathe again, he asks me what I'm most afraid of right now. The question makes me stop and actually think instead of just feeling everything at once. I realize what scares me the most is that I still love him exactly the same as before. Nothing about my feelings changed when I saw those DNA results. But now that love feels wrong and dirty and contaminated by this knowledge, I can never unknow. I tell Cormac this, and he nods like it makes perfect sense. He explains that my feelings are completely valid and normal for this situation. He says grief for this kind of loss is really complicated because the person is still alive and you still love them, but the relationship has to die anyway. Hearing him say that out loud makes it feel more real somehow. Over the next week, I try to go to my classes and act like everything is normal. But literally everything reminds me of him. I'm sitting in sociology and the professor is lecturing about family systems. Her voice creates these amber waves and the colors around me start to blur together and I grab my bag and practically run out of the classroom. I end up sitting on a bench outside trying to calm down while other students walk past. When I get back to my dorm, Melinda takes one look at me and asks what happened. I tell her about the classroom and she suggests maybe I should tell my parents what's going on. The thought of having that conversation makes me want to throw up. How do I tell my parents I've been dating my cousin for 6 months? How do I explain this without them thinking I'm disgusting? But Melinda points out that I need support right now, and my parents love me. At my next session, Cormac encourages the same thing, reaching out to family for support. So that night, I finally call my mom. My hands are shaking when I dial her number. When she answers, I can barely get the words out. I'm crying before I even start explaining. I tell her about the DNA test and what we found and who my boyfriend actually is. My mom goes completely silent on the other end of the phone. The silence stretches out so long, I think maybe the call dropped. Then she asks if I'm sure about the DNA results, like maybe there was some kind of mistake at the lab. I tell her I'm sure, and that his mom already confirmed it, that my dad is her brother. Then my mom starts crying too, and that makes me cry even harder. Through her tears, she tells me my dad is going to be so upset. She says he spent 20 years missing his sister, and now this is how he finds out his daughter accidentally got involved with his nephew. The guilt I feel hearing that adds this whole other layer to everything else I'm trying to process. It's not just about me and my boyfriend anymore. It's about my dad and his sister and 20 years of family pain. My dad calls me the next day. His voice sounds broken in a way I've never heard before. He asks if I'm okay first, then he apologizes for the estrangement that made this possible. He keeps saying he should have tried harder to fix things with his sister years ago. I tell him it's not his fault, but he won't accept that. He says if he hadn't been so stubborn and proud, if he'd just reached out to his sister at any point in the last 2 decades, we would have known we were cousins. We would have known before anything happened. I'm crying again listening to him blame himself for something he couldn't have predicted. He asks if he can come visit me, and I say yes because I really need my family right now. Even though part of me dreads the conversation we're going to have face to face. 2 days later, he shows up at my dorm. When I open the door, he just pulls me into this long hug without saying anything. I can feel him shaking, and I realize he's crying too. We stand there in the doorway for what feels like forever, just holding on to each other. We end up going to a coffee shop off campus because I can't have this conversation in my dorm, where everything feels too small. We sit in a corner booth, and my dad orders us both coffee that neither of us drinks. He tells me the whole story of the fight with his sister. Their parents died and left behind this complicated estate with property and investments. Both my dad and his sister felt like the other one was being greedy and unfair about how to divide everything. What started as disagreements about money turned into accusations about who loved their parents more. They both said things they couldn't take back. My dad admits now that pride and stubbornness kept them from reconciling even after the estate was settled. He says he thought about reaching out so many times over the years, but he always convinced himself it was too late, or that she should call first. He never imagined their silence could lead to something like this. I ask him if he's going to reach out to his sister now, and he sets down his untouched coffee. She called him the day after her son told her what happened. They talked for 2 hours, both of them crying and apologizing for things they said 20 years ago. My dad's voice cracks when he says the timing feels cruel because it took this nightmare to bring them back together. I reach across the table and squeeze his hand because I don't know what else to do. We sit there for a few more minutes before he drives me back to my dorm. When I hug him goodbye in the parking lot, he holds on longer than usual, and I feel him shaking again. I go upstairs and collapse on my bed with all my clothes still on. Melinda comes in an hour later and finds me staring at the ceiling. She sits on the edge of my bed and rubs my back without saying anything. 3 days later, my phone buzzes with a text from my boyfriend. His mom wants to meet with my family to talk through everything. The message sits on my screen and I feel my chest get tight. The thought of sitting in a room with all of them makes me want to throw. I text back that I need time to think about it, and he responds immediately saying he understands. I stare at my phone for 20 minutes before I call Cormac's office and leave a message asking for an emergency session. He calls me back within an hour and squeezes me in the next morning. In his office, I tell him about the proposed family meeting and how the idea of it makes my anxiety spike so bad I can barely breathe. Cormac pulls out a notepad and we spend the next hour role-playing difficult conversations. He pretends to be my boyfriend's mom, then my dad, then my boyfriend. We practice me setting boundaries about what I'm willing to discuss. He teaches me phrases I can use if things get too overwhelming. By the end of the session, I feel slightly less terrified but still sick about the whole thing. I text my boyfriend that I'll do the meeting, but it needs to be soon because I can't live with this hanging over me. He suggests the following Saturday at a restaurant downtown that has private rooms. My mom calls me that night and asks if I'm sure I want to do this. I tell her I'm not sure about anything anymore, but we need to face this together. The week leading up to the meeting drags by so slowly, I think I might lose my mind. I practice the phrases Cormac taught me every morning in the shower. Melinda quizzes me on my boundaries. Saturday arrives and I put on the most normal-looking outfit I can find, because I don't want to look like I'm falling apart even though I am. My parents pick me up at noon and we drive to the restaurant in silence. The private room is in the back, and when we walk in, my boyfriend and his mom are already sitting at the table. The awkwardness hits me like a physical force, and I have to remind myself to keep breathing. We all sit down and nobody knows where to look. My boyfriend and I make eye contact for half a second before we both look away. His mom starts talking first, apologizing to my dad for the years of silence. My dad responds with his own apology. They go back and forth like this while I sit frozen in my chair. My mom reaches under the table and takes my hand. My boyfriend's mom turns to me and her eyes are already red from crying. She apologizes directly to me and says she never imagined her fight with my dad would hurt anyone else. She says especially not like this, and her voice breaks. My mom squeezes my hand tighter under the table. I try to stay composed, but watching his mom cry makes my own eyes start to water. I can feel everyone's pain in the room, and it makes holding myself together so much harder. My dad looks at me with concern, and I know he's worried about me breaking down. The parents keep talking for what feels like forever, going over the details of their fight and how they both wish they'd handled things differently. Then my boyfriend finally speaks up. He says we need to discuss what happens with our relationship. The entire room goes completely quiet. My dad looks at me with such sadness in his eyes, and I realize he's scared of what I'm about to say. I take a deep breath and force the words out. I tell everyone that I don't think we can continue dating even though we both still have feelings for each other. My boyfriend's face crumbles when I say it, but he doesn't argue or try to change my mind. His mom nods slowly like she expected this answer all along. My mom squeezes my hand so tight it almost hurts, and I can see her trying not to cry. My boyfriend clears his throat and says he understands my decision. Then he asks if we can at least stay friends eventually, once we've both had time to process everything. I have to be honest with him even though it kills me. I tell him I don't know if friendship is possible because right now everything about him hurts too much. The silence after I say that feels heavy and thick, and I can feel the grief radiating off everyone in different ways. My dad looks devastated. My mom is crying quietly. His mom has her hand over her mouth. My boyfriend is staring at the table like he might fall apart. We sit in that horrible silence for a minute before I say, we need complete separation for now. No contact while we both process and heal. He nods even though I can see exactly how much that costs him to agree to. We all stand up to leave because there's nothing else to say. As we're walking out, he catches my arm gently. He whispers that he's sorry and his voice sounds destroyed. I tell him I'm sorry too because this isn't anyone's fault, but it's destroying us anyway. My parents drive me back to campus and none of us talk the whole way. When I get to my dorm, I lock the door and cry for 3 hours straight. My chromesthesia makes everything worse because it constantly reminds me of him. Every single sound creates colors that trigger memories I'm trying to forget. The coffee machine in my dorm lounge sounds like rose gold, and I remember that's what he said my voice looked like. I have to leave the lounge and make coffee in my room with a kettle instead. A girl laughing in the hallway creates golden bursts, and I remember his laugh looked the same way. I start wearing headphones everywhere just to block out the sounds. Even music hurts because we used to share songs and compare the colors we saw. I stop listening to anything we listened to together, which eliminates about half my playlist. I stop going to places we used to go together because the colors there are too painful to handle. That means avoiding half the campus, including the music building where we spent so many evenings watching colors only we could see. The dining hall we always ate at. The library study room we claimed as ours. The bench outside the science building where we had our first kiss. Melinda tries to help by suggesting new places to eat and study. We try a different dining hall across campus and a coffee shop in town I've never been to before. But everywhere feels wrong without him. The colors are wrong. The sounds are wrong. Everything reminds me of what I lost. I'm going through the motions of being a college student, but I feel like I'm underwater. Classes happen around me, but I can barely focus. Melinda walks me to my sessions with Cormac twice a week because she's worried I won't go otherwise. She's probably right. In my next session with Cormac, I ask him why this hurts so much when technically we didn't do anything wrong, and he leans forward with his hands folded. He tells me what I'm experiencing is complicated grief, the kind where you're mourning a relationship that has to end even though love still exists on both sides. He explains that the biological relationship doesn't erase what we felt or make our connection less real, but it does make continuing impossible for psychological and social reasons that the way he says it makes sense but doesn't make it hurt less. I leave his office feeling like I understand my pain better, but still drowning in it. 2 weeks later, Svetlana corners me in the dining hall and tells me I need to start moving forward, that staying stuck in grief isn't helping me heal. She knows this guy in my biology class who thinks I'm cute and she wants to set us up. I tell her I'm not ready, but she insists that I'll never feel ready, that sometimes you just have to push through the fear. Against my better judgment, I agree to meet him for coffee. The date happens on a Thursday evening at a cafe I've never been to before. He's nice enough, talks about his major and his family, and asks me questions about mine, but the whole time I'm comparing him to my ex. His laugh doesn't create the right colors. His voice sounds flat and boring instead of emerald green. When he tells a joke, I smile, but inside I'm thinking about how my ex would have made that joke better, funnier, with perfect timing. The guilt sits heavy in my stomach because this guy doesn't deserve to be compared to someone else. After an hour, he suggests we take a walk. We end up by his car in the parking lot, and he leans in to kiss me goodnight. Panic hits me like a physical force. I step back quickly and mumble something about needing to leave, then practically run to my car. He calls after me asking if he did something wrong, but I'm already gone. I sit in my car for an hour afterward just crying, feeling broken and stupid and like I'll never be normal again. My phone buzzes with texts from him asking if I'm okay, and I can't even respond because I don't know how to explain what's wrong with me. Svetlana shows up at my dorm the next morning with coffee and breakfast sandwiches. She doesn't ask what happened, just sits on my bed and waits. I finally admit that I don't know if I'll ever be able to be intimate with anyone again. The thought of getting close to someone and then discovering another horrible secret makes me want to throw up. What if there's something else I don't know? Some other nightmare waiting to destroy me? She listens without judgment while I spiral, then tells me healing isn't linear and it's okay that I'm not ready yet. She says I went on the date too soon, and that's fine. I can try again when I'm actually ready, instead of when someone tells me I should be. Her acceptance of where I am helps more than any advice could. The next 2 months pass in a blur of classes and therapy and trying to exist in a world that feels wrong. Then one random Tuesday, I'm walking across campus to my chemistry lab when I see him. He's coming out of the library and I'm heading toward the science building, and suddenly we're 20 feet apart just staring at each other. He looks thinner than I remember, with dark circles under his eyes that match mine. I'm sure I look just as terrible. We manage awkward hellos, our voices overlapping in the worst way. Then we both move quickly in opposite directions like we can't get away from each other fast enough. Brief encounter sends me into a complete spiral for the next 3 days. I skip classes and stay in my room and cry more than I have in weeks. Seeing him brought back everything I've been trying to process. Every memory and feeling I've been working to manage. I realize I'm not as far along in healing as I thought I was. Cormac reminds me during our emergency session that grief has no timeline, and that setbacks are normal, especially with a loss this complicated. He tells me running into my ex was always going to be hard whenever it happened, that I shouldn't judge my progress based on one bad reaction. His words help, but don't stop the ache. A week later, Cormac suggests I try a support group for people dealing with complex family trauma. He knows someone named Felix Velez who runs one specifically for situations where family secrets have caused major life disruption. I'm nervous about sharing my story with strangers, but I agree to try it. The first meeting happens in a community center conference room with 8 other people sitting in a circle. Felix introduces himself and explains the group rules, then asks if anyone wants to share. I stay quiet that first night, just listening to other people's stories. Nobody else has my exact situation, but the themes are similar. Loss and impossible choices and grief for relationships that can't continue. Hearing that I'm not alone in experiencing something this painful. The second week, I share my story for the first time outside of therapy and my close friends. My voice shakes as I explain about the chromesthesia and the DNA test and discovering we were cousins. The group listens without judgment and several people nod like they understand. After the meeting, someone approaches me, an older woman maybe in her 40s. She tells me her own family secret destroyed her marriage 5 years ago and she's still processing it. We talk for 20 minutes in the parking lot and she tells me that some situations genuinely have no good solutions, that accepting the unfairness is part of healing. She says I can survive this even though it feels impossible right now, and I believe her because she's living proof. 3 months after the breakup, something shifts. I'm in my dorm room studying when Melinda puts on music and I realize I can listen without every song triggering memories of him. The colors are still there, my chromesthesia hasn't changed, but the acute pain has dulled into something more manageable. It's not that I've forgotten or stopped caring. The grief is still there, but it's becoming something I can carry instead of something that crushes me. I can think about him without falling apart. I can see the colors sounds make without immediately crying. Progress feels slow and small but real. My dad calls one evening to tell me he and his sister are rebuilding their relationship. They've been talking regularly and they're planning to have Thanksgiving together this year, the first time in 20 years. I tell him I'm happy for them, and I mean it, but I also feel resentful that their reconciliation came from my pain. In my next session with Cormac, I admit those complicated feelings, and he helps me understand that both emotions can exist at the same time. I can be glad they're healing their relationship while also angry that it took my suffering to make it happen. When my dad asks if I'll come to Thanksgiving, I have to think about it for a few days. The idea of sitting at a table with my ex after months of no contact would undo so much progress. I finally tell my parents I can't go, and they understand, even though I can tell my dad is disappointed. Melinda immediately invites me to spend Thanksgiving with her family instead, and I accept gratefully. Being around people who don't know my story, who see me as just Melinda's college friend, feels like a relief I didn't know I needed. At dinner, Melinda's little brother sits next. I tell him we realized we weren't right for each other, which is technically true even if it's missing about 1,000 painful details. He nods and goes back to his mashed potatoes like that explanation makes perfect sense, and I feel something shift inside me. The simplicity of giving an answer that a kid can accept without needing the whole complicated truth makes me realize I'm getting better at carrying this secret. I can talk about the breakup now without falling apart, can give a version of events that's honest enough without being destructive. Winter break gives me space from campus and all its reminders, and I spend 2 weeks at home rediscovering parts of myself that existed before him. My old art supplies are still in my closet from high school, and one afternoon I pull them out and set up in the dining room. I start painting again, using my chromesthesia to create visual representations of music. I put on instrumental tracks and paint the colors I see, blues and purples and golds flowing across canvas in patterns that match the sound waves only I can perceive. It feels like reclaiming something that was ours and making it just mine. The chromesthesia doesn't belong to our relationship anymore. It belongs to me. My mom watches me paint one afternoon while I'm working on a piece inspired by rain sounds, all powder blue droplets and silver streaks. She comments that I seem more like myself lately, more present and engaged with life instead of just going through motions. I realize she's right as I'm adding details to the canvas. The sharp edges of grief are dulling into something more manageable, something I can carry without it crushing me. I'm not happy yet, but I'm not drowning anymore either, and that feels like progress. Real, actual progress that I can measure in moments like this where I'm creating something and feeling okay about it. I get a text from my ex in January saying he's transferring to a university in another state because staying here is too hard and he hopes I'm doing okay. I stare at the message for a long time, reading it over and over, trying to figure out how I feel about. Part of me is relieved because it means I won't risk running into him on campus anymore, but part of me feels sad because it's another loss on top of everything else. I finally respond that I understand, and I hope he finds peace, keeping my message short and kind. Then I delete his number from my phone so I'm not tempted to reach out again during weak moments. Knowing he's leaving creates a strange mix of relief and sadness that sits heavy in my chest for days. It means I won't risk seeing him in the library or the dining hall, won't have to worry about bumping into him at parties or campus events. But it also feels like another ending, another door closing on what we had. I talk about it with Cormac in my next session, and he helps me reframe it as both of us choosing healing over proximity. We're each doing what we need to do to move forward, and putting physical distance between us is probably the healthiest thing we can do for each other right now. Spring semester starts, and I'm taking all new classes in different buildings, creating a campus experience that doesn't overlap with memories of us. I signed up for courses I've never taken before in parts of campus I rarely visited, giving myself a fresh start. Svetlana introduces me to her study group, and I start building new friendships with people who only know the current version of me. They don't know about my ex or the DNA test or any of it, and that feels freeing. I can be whoever I want to be with them, can define myself by who I am now instead of what happened to me. One evening in the library, I hear someone humming while they work, and I see the colors it creates floating through the air between the bookshelves. For the first time in months, I feel curious about my chromesthesia instead of pained by it. Actually, I realize the condition that brought us together doesn't have to be permanently ruined by how things ended. It's still mine, still part of who I am, and I can reclaim it. I attend a lecture about synesthesia research that's open to the whole campus, and afterward I talk to the professor about my experiences with chromesthesia. She's fascinated and asks tons of questions about what I see and how it works, and she asks if I'd consider participating in her study. Saying yes feels like reclaiming this part of myself for science and understanding, instead of just romance and loss. Through the research study, I meet other people with synesthesia, and while none of them have chromesthesia specifically, being around people who understand sensory differences helps me feel less isolated. One participant mentions an online community for chromesthetes, and I join even though I'm nervous about it. In the online community, I read stories from other people with chromesthesia, and I'm struck by how many of them describe feeling alone until I don't share my story about my ex because it's too complicated. But I participate in discussions about music and color associations, about which instruments create which colors, about how we manage sensory overload in loud environments. 6 months passed, and I woke up one morning realizing I felt okay for the first time since everything happened. Not happy exactly, but steady in a way I hadn't been in months. My grades were solid, better than they'd been in over a year. I had plans with friends most weekends. The chromesthesia colors I saw every day felt like they belonged to me again instead of being tied up in grief. I could walk past the music building without my chest tightening. I could hear someone laugh and see the golden sparks it created without immediately thinking of him. The healing wasn't dramatic or sudden. It happened in small pieces over weeks and months, until one day I noticed the weight pressing on my chest had lifted enough that I could breathe normally again. My dad called on a Tuesday evening while I was studying in my room. He asked how classes were going, and we talked about normal things for a while before he got quiet. His sister had reached out again asking about me specifically. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to meet her sometime. Just the two of them. Nope, my stomach flipped at the thought, but I told him I'd think about it. After we hung up, I sat staring at my textbook without seeing the words. Meeting my aunt felt like facing the last piece of this situation I'd been avoiding. She was real family, connected to both me and my ex in ways that made everything complicated. But she was also the person whose estrangement from my dad had made this whole disaster possible in the first place. I brought it up with Cormac at my next session. He listened while I explained my mixed feelings about meeting her. Part of me wanted to know her because she was family, and I'd lost enough already. Part of me resented her for the fight that kept our families apart for 20 years. Cormac asked what I thought I might gain from meeting her, and I admitted it might provide some kind of closure, a way to understand the family history that led to everything. He nodded and said that made sense, that sometimes facing the hard things is how we finish processing them. I left his office and texted my dad that night saying I was ready to meet her if she still wanted to. 2 weeks later, I sat across from my aunt at a small Italian restaurant she'd picked, somewhere quiet where we could actually talk. She looked like my dad around the eyes. That similarity hit me hard when she walked in. We hugged awkwardly and sat down, and before I could say anything, she started apologizing. She was sorry for everything. Sorry for the fight with my dad. Sorry for staying angry so long. Sorry that her silence had hurt me in ways she never imagined possible. I told her it wasn't her fault because it wasn't. Not really. Nobody could have predicted this. She wiped, my chest tightened, but I nodded because I did want to know even though it hurt. She told me he was doing okay, adjusting to the new place, making friends, keeping busy with classes and a part-time job. Hearing that he was okay made something loosen inside me. I'd worried about him even though we couldn't talk, wondered if he was surviving this the way I was trying to. Knowing he'd found some stability at his new school lifted a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. My aunt pulled out her phone and showed me pictures of him as a kid. There he was at maybe 7 years old, grinning with missing front teeth. There he was as a teenager looking awkward in a school photo. She told me stories about our grandparents, people I'd never met because of the family split. Our grandmother had been a painter who saw the world in unusual ways. Our grandfather had played violin and filled their house with music. I realized I was learning about family history that had always existed, but been kept from me by silence and pride. The stories were strange and sad, but also healing in a way I hadn't expected. This was my family too, these people whose genes I carried, whose traits showed up in my face and my chromesthesia. When we finished eating, my aunt walked me to my car and hugged me tight. She told me I was always welcome in her life if I wanted that, no pressure, but the door was open whenever I was ready. I drove home feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the meeting had gone better than I feared. Heavier because now I had to decide what kind of relationship I wanted with her. I thought about it for a few days before I realized I did want to know her. She was family, and the estrangement that had made this disaster possible didn't have to continue with my generation. I could choose differently than our parents had. I texted her saying I'd like to stay in touch if she meant what she said. She responded immediately saying she'd love that. We started texting regularly, nothing heavy, just small updates about our day. She sent me recipes that had belonged to our grandmother, handwritten cards she'd saved for decades. I tried making the grandmother's apple cake, and it turned out pretty good. Each recipe felt like building something new from the wreckage, creating connection where there had only been absence before. The next support group meeting, I finally shared the full story of what happened. Felix had been patient for months, never pushing, but I could tell he knew I was holding something back. I waited until near the end of the session when the room felt safe, and then I just started talking. I told them about the chromesthesia bringing us together, about the DNA test, about discovering we were cousins after 6 months of dating. I told them about the breakup and the grief and the slow climb back to feeling okay. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment before Felix thanked me for trusting the group with something so painful. Several other members nodded and a few had tears in their eyes. After the meeting ended, 3 different people came up to me privately offering support, sharing their own stories of impossible losses. One woman who'd been in the group longer than me pulled me aside. She told me that my willingness to end the relationship, even though I still loved him, showed incredible strength and self-awareness. I'd been so focused on what I lost that I hadn't thought about it that way. She said a lot of people would have tried to make it work anyway, would have convinced themselves the love was enough to overcome the biology. But I'd faced the reality head-on and made the hard choice. That reframe shifted something in how I saw myself. I wasn't just someone who'd lost something precious. I was someone who'd survived something terrible and come out the other side. I'd had the courage to walk away from love when staying would have destroyed us both. I started dating again in small ways, nothing serious, just coffee or movies with people I met through friends or classes. The first few dates were awkward because I kept comparing everyone to my ex. This guy's laugh created orange ripples instead of golden ones. That guy didn't understand why I needed to leave the loud rest, but slowly I got better at being present with new people instead of constantly measuring them against what I'd lost. The fear that I'd never be able to trust or connect with anyone again started fading. I discovered I was more resilient than I'd thought. Each date that didn't work out didn't devastate me. Each conversation that went well felt like proof I could do this again someday. The anniversary of the day we got our DNA results landed on a Saturday. I woke up knowing what day it was, and let myself feel it fully, instead of pushing it away. I pulled out the box of photos and gifts I'd saved from our relationship, things I couldn't throw away but couldn't look at either. I sat on my bed and cried for a few hours, looking at pictures of us at concerts, reading notes he'd written me, remembering how it felt when everything was good. Then I put everything back in the box and slid it under my bed and texted Svetlana asking if she wanted to get dinner. She said yes immediately without asking if I was okay because she already knew I wasn't. We met at our favorite Thai place and she just sat with me, talking about normal things, letting me be sad without trying to fix it. A year after the breakup, I went to a concert at a small venue downtown with some friends from my study group. The band was good and the crowd was energetic, and I let myself get lost in the music and colors only I could see. Halfway through the set, I noticed someone across the room standing perfectly still while they had their eyes closed and this expression on their face like they were seeing something nobody else could. I wondered if they might have chromesthesia too, if they were watching the same color show I was. I didn't approach them because I wasn't ready for that yet. But noticing them and feeling curious instead of devastated made me realize something had shifted. Maybe someday I'd be ready to connect with another chromesthete. Maybe someday I'd be able to share that part of myself again without it feeling like betraying what I'd lost. I wasn't there yet, but standing in that concert hall watching colors bloom and fade with the music, I could imagine getting there eventually. That spring, I walked across the stage to get my diploma with honors, and the whole ceremony felt surreal in a good way. My parents sat in the middle section with my aunt next to them, and seeing her there made something settle in my chest that I didn't know was still unsettled. She'd driven 4 hours to be there and had texted me that morning saying she was proud of me, which made me cry before I even put on my cap and gown. My ex graduated from his school in another state the week before, so I didn't have to worry about running into him or making awkward eye contact across a crowded auditorium. That relief was huge because I wanted this day to be about moving forward, not about what I'd lost. After the ceremony, my dad found me in the crowd and pulled me aside while my mom was taking pictures with Melinda and Svetlana. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking, and I could see his eyes getting wet. He told me he was proud of how I'd handled everything, that watching me survive this had taught him things about being strong and keeping grace even when life gets impossible. I told him I learned those things from watching him and Mom, and then we were both crying happy tears mixed with sad ones right there in the middle of all the celebrating families. My mom came over and hugged us both, and for a few minutes we just stood there holding each other while people streamed past us toward the parking lot. 3 weeks later, I got the acceptance email from the graduate program in psychology, and I read it 5 times before I believed it was real. They wanted me to study family systems and trauma, which felt like the universe confirming that my own experience had a purpose beyond just surviving it. I knew part of why I wanted this field was because I understood complicated grief from the inside now, knew what it felt like when love and loss got tangled up in ways that didn't make sense to anyone who hadn't lived it. Cormac wrote me a recommendation letter that apparently talked about my resilience and insight, and when I thanked him in our last session before I moved for school, he told me I was going to help a lot of people because I got it in a way most therapists never would. That conversation stayed with me through the whole summer as I packed up my life and prepared for grad school. 2 years, I'd built a full life that didn't revolve around what I'd lost, made friends who knew me as just me instead of as the girl with the tragic story. My chromesthesia was part of who I was again, instead of a constant reminder of pain, and I could listen to music or hear certain sounds without immediately thinking of him. I still thought about him sometimes, probably always would, but the thoughts didn't knock me over anymore. They were just there, like old scars that didn't hurt, but hadn't completely faded either. I wondered occasionally if he was okay, if he'd found his own version of healing, but I didn't look him up or try to find out. Some distances needed to stay in place. One Tuesday afternoon, I was at a coffee shop near campus, studying for my family systems exam, when I heard someone at the next table talking about seeing colors and sounds. I looked up and saw a woman about my age gesturing excitedly to her friend, describing how music created these visual experiences that nobody else could see. The friend looked confused but interested, asking questions about what different instruments looked like. I smiled and went back to my textbook, highlighting a passage about intergenerational trauma patterns. Sitting there in that coffee shop with my grad school materials spread out in front of me, and the sound of that woman's excited voice creating soft yellow ripples in my vision, I realized something. I was genuinely happy now, not despite what happened, but because I'd survived it and built something real from all that grief. That felt like the best possible thing I could have gotten from an impossible situation.